Welcome back to Dark Horror Stories. In today's episode, I'm sharing 8 disturbing stories from Montana, stories told by park rangers who spent too long in places most people only pass through on postcards. These are the kinds of places that look beautiful right up until the moment they start feeling occupied. Make sure to hit that like and subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Story 1. The east side of Glacier always felt lonelier to me than the parts tourists know. Everybody talks about the lakes and the cliffs and the mountain goats standing around like they own the place, which I guess they do. But if you work there long enough, you start noticing the spaces between the pretty things. The pullouts nobody uses after 5. The maintenance roads with grass growing down the middle. The old patrol cabins that still smell like wet wool and mouse nests even in August. I was doing backcountry ranger work that season, mostly trail checks and late-day welfare patrols, and I'd been assigned a stretch near Cut Bank for 3 weeks. I remember because I'd already gone through my good instant coffee and was down to the cheap stuff that tasted faintly like burnt plastic. My truck's heater fan squealed whenever I turned it past level 2. I had sunflower seed shells in the cup holder, a rolled map with a coffee ring on it, and one bootlace I kept meaning to replace because the tip had split and gone soft. Nothing dramatic, just work. People like to imagine rangers spend all day having profound moments under the open sky. Mostly you're checking privies, writing notes about trail washouts, and telling visitors not to feed foxes. That evening, I was headed toward an old cabin used for storm shelter on a closed spur trail. It wasn't a place visitors were supposed to be, and barely any staff used it anymore either. The closure sign had come down twice that month, and I thought some local kid was messing with it. I wanted to put it back up before dark. It was late enough that the light had gone flat and gray, the kind that makes distances hard to judge. Not dark yet, but heading there. About half a mile in, I found the sign leaning carefully against a lodgepole instead of lying blown over. That was the first thing that bothered me. Not scared me, bothered me. The bolts had been set in a neat little stack on the dirt beside it, as if whoever took it down didn't want to lose them. I remember crouching there, holding those bolts in my hand, and telling myself another ranger had probably done it for repair and forgotten to log it. That made enough sense that I almost turned around. Then I heard somebody call me from the trees. Eli. Not shout, not even loud. Just close enough that my shoulders went tight on their own. There are a lot of sounds out there that can fool you. Wind slides through burned timber in a way that can sound like talking. Jays can mimic certain tones, I know all that, so I stood up and answered, "Trails closed," because that's what my mouth did before my brain got involved. Nothing came back. I walked another 100 yards, maybe less, and found a second strange thing, one set of footprints in the dust at the center of the trail. Just one. A left boot print pressed clean into the powder. No approach tracks. No prints continuing forward. I actually laughed a little when I saw it, but it was one of those dry laughs people do when they're alone and not enjoying themselves. I thought maybe a chunk of dirt had broken in a weird way. Maybe my own print from earlier had held shape after the wind erased the rest. Weak explanation, but I tried it on anyway. The cabin sat in a stand of fir, roof listing, porch half collapsed. Somebody had tied the door open with orange survey tape. The tape moved almost imperceptibly, even though the air around me was dead still. Inside, it smelled like wet wood, old ash, and that Swedish dusty smell mice leave behind. There was a cot with the canvas sagging through the frame, 2 coffee tins, a split pack of playing cards from some year I didn't bother checking, and the old wall phone mounted beside the logbook shelf. The phone hadn't worked in years. It wasn't even connected. I knew that because I'd helped pull some of the line the previous spring. Still, the receiver was off the hook. That made me stop, not because it was impossible, because it felt recent. I set my pack down, muttered something dumb like "very funny," and put the receiver back into its cradle. Then I opened the logbook. The last entry on that page was months old. The next line down in fresh pencil were 5 words in block letters. "Don't answer me after dark." I stared at that for a long time. The pencil groove was still bright. I touched it with my thumb and got graphite on my skin. And before I could decide what bothered me more, the message or the fact that I hadn't heard anyone leave, the phone rang. I think I made a sound, not a scream, more like the noise you make when cold water hits your back. It rang once, paused, rang again. Old metal bells inside a dead phone. I told myself there had to be some cross current, some leftover line, some electrical thing I didn't understand. That was the only direction my mind would go. I picked it up because part of me wanted to prove there was a reason. For a second, there was only a hiss. Then my sister's voice said, "You left me here." My sister Mara had been dead 9 years. I didn't drop the phone right away. That's the part I hate admitting. Some terrible, hopeful part of me lined toward it before the rest of me caught up. Then I put it down so fast it banged against the wall. I backed out of the cabin and nearly missed the figure standing beyond the porch. It was maybe 30 feet away between 2 firs where the trees thinned toward the slope. At first I thought it was a woman in a yellow rain shell. That color catches your eye out there. Then it shifted, just enough for me to understand the yellow was old lichen hanging from branches behind it. What I was looking at was pale, bareheaded, and too narrow through the ribs, like it had been stretched upright. One arm hung low enough that the fingers touched the needles. Its face wasn't clear except for the mouth. The mouth was moving, opening and closing in soft, careful shapes, but Mara's voice came from behind me, from inside the cabin. "Eli," it said again, almost patient now, "you never came back." I ran, no strategy. I just went off the trail and down toward the creek because water was the only landmark I could trust without thinking. Branches slapped my face. My radio caught on something and yanked sideways. The voice kept pace for a while, not always from the same direction. Sometimes from uphill, once from right beside my ear, low enough that I felt air move against my neck. I remember sliding down a bank and hitting the creek hard enough to soak one leg through. I remember the water being glacier cold, sharp enough to force me back into my body. I crossed anyway. Midstream, I looked up. That thing was on the opposite bank, not chasing, just standing there. Its head tipped slightly, like a dog hearing a distant sound, and then its jaw opened farther than it should have. Not wide, long. The lower half seemed to unhook and drop, skin stretching glossy in the dim light, and Mara's voice came out of that opening one last time. Wrong way. I stumbled through willow and shale until I hit the service road at full dark. I left my pack somewhere back there. Left the radio too, I think, or maybe it snapped off later. The sequence gets fuzzy. I made it to the truck, locked the doors, and sat with my hands shaking so hard I couldn't fit the key into the ignition the first 2 tries. I drove straight to station housing and told nobody the real version that night. I said I'd had a bad fall, maybe hypothermia starting, maybe heard things near the creek. Everybody accepted that because it was easier. The next morning, one of the other rangers drove me back out to recover my gear. We found the pack hanging from the closure signpost at the trailhead, not ripped, not dragged, set there neatly. My radio was inside the top pouch, so was the logbook page from the cabin, torn cleanly out and folded into quarters. I opened it in the truck and saw the line I'd read the night before. Under it, in the same block letters, there was another one. "I did call you back. I still work outdoors, but not there, and not alone if I can help it." Every now and then, if a phone rings in an empty office and nobody moves fast enough to answer it, I have to leave the room before I do something stupid. Story 2. There's a kind of quiet you get in Montana after the first real snow where everything sounds padded over, as if the land is holding its breath under a blanket. A lot of people find it peaceful. I did too, mostly. I worked winter operations at a state park west of Three Forks, and the off-season suited me. Fewer visitors, fewer lost gloves, fewer people asking where the elk hang out like they've got assigned seating. That November, I was paired with a volunteer named Grant Pella to winterize a disused campground on the far side of the property. He was younger than me by maybe 6 or 7 years, enthusiastic in that way seasonal people sometimes are before a place gets under their skin. He kept instant cider packets in his jacket pocket, wore brand new gaiters that still squeaked when he walked, and had this little notebook where he wrote down bird sightings in blocky, careful letters. I remember that because later I found one of those notebook's pages stuck to my tire. The campground had an old comfort station and a maintenance cabin that predated most of the modern buildings. Both were scheduled for demolition eventually. The cabin especially had that look of something half abandoned, half forgotten. Linoleum curling up at the corners, metal sink stained brown around the drain, a deck of cards swollen from damp, lemon cleaner under the counter that smelled stronger than it should have after so many years. There were old trap magazines in one corner and a jar of pennies on the windowsill cloudy with dust. We got there mid-afternoon under a low white sky. Grant complained that his thermos had leaked coffee into his passenger seat. I teased him about buying bargain lids. We shut off the water, drained lines, taped notices over the restroom doors. Normal work, cold fingers, sore knees, nothing else. The first odd thing was the sound under the cabin floor. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I straightened up from the sink and looked at Grant. He heard it too, but he shrugged and said porcupine. That was good enough for me. Old cabins collect animals. I went back to draining the last pipe. A few minutes later, the knocks came again, this time moving from the far corner of the room to directly beneath us, quick little bursts, as if something were tracking our steps from underneath. Grant crouched and peered into the gap where the linoleum had pulled away. "Probably raccoon," he said, but his voice had gone thin. I said maybe frozen pipes settling, which made no sense because we were in the process of draining them, and I knew it. But the brain will reach for anything ordinary when it wants to stay ordinary. Outside, the light had started to blow up. We were maybe 20 minutes from packing out when I found the access hatch to the crawl space open behind the cabin. That hatch was iron, rusted, heavy enough you had to brace a boot to lift it. We hadn't touched it. Snow around it was mostly clean except for a broad, disturbed patch, not quite footprints. More like somebody had knelt there and dragged themselves in. Grant said maybe a deer had broken through. Then he looked at me and added, "That sounded dumb out loud." We should have left right then, I know that. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and leaned down. The crawl space wasn't deep. 18 inches maybe, 2 feet at the highest point. Dirt, cinder blocks, old pipe runs. My light shook a little because my hand had started doing that thing where it vibrates without asking permission. I saw nothing except insulation hanging loose and the gloss of frost on the underside of the floorboards. Then the beam landed on a line scratched in the dirt. Not random. Words. "Stay above." I jerked back hard enough to crack the back of my head on the siding. Grant swore and asked what I saw. I almost lied. I actually wanted to, but then something moved in the dark beyond the beam, not coming toward us, just rearranging itself, like a person rolling from one shoulder to the other in a too small bed. We slammed the hatch shut together. The rest got strange fast. The cabin began answering us. That's the only way I know to say it. If Grant stepped left, there was a scrape beneath the left side. If I crossed to the stove, something dragged itself beneath the stove. Once we both froze at the same time, and there came this soft, wet little adjustment directly under the middle of the room, as if whatever was down there had also stopped to listen. I said it had to be a trapped animal. I said we needed animal control. I said several reasonable things while backing toward the door. Grant reached for the deadbolt. 3 fingertips came out of the stove's ash cleanup below his hand, not through a broken panel, through the actual little iron hatch we hadn't noticed hanging open by an inch. The fingers were gray-white with black crescents packed under the nails, too long, jointed wrong. They flexed once against the air as if testing it. Then an arm kept coming. It folded out of that space the way a spider leg unfolds, elbow bending the wrong direction first, then correcting itself with a soft click. Dirt sifted off it. Grant stumbled backward so hard he hit the table and sent the jar of pennies exploding across the floor. That was the moment everything in me stopped arguing. There was no animal explanation left. The stove door clanged. Something inside the walls started moving upward. We went for the back exit because it was closer. Grant yanked it open, and a gust hit us full in the face, carrying that metallic snow smell. I slipped on the steps and nearly went down. Behind us, boards thudded once, twice, then a long drag over the ceiling, crossing from one end of the cabin to the other as if whatever had been under us was now above us. We ran to the truck. Of course, it didn't start immediately. Nothing ever does when you need it. The engine turned and coughed, turned again. Grant kept looking over my shoulder, not speaking anymore. On the 3rd try, it caught. As I threw the truck in reverse, Grant made this horrible choked noise and pointed. Something was lying belly down on the cabin roof, hands gripping the edge. I saw the top half of it in the headlights, hairless head. Skin stretched shiny over shoulder blades. The mouth hung open, not in a scream, not in a grin, just open, and packed inside were dark clumps of what looked like insulation or nesting material. It had no business fitting inside the spaces it had come from. That was the worst part. It looked cramped by the world itself. I backed into a drift, fishtailed, then found the road. We left tools, paperwork, everything. The next day, with daylight and 2 maintenance staff, we went back. Nothing was on the roof. The hatch behind the cabin was shut, no tracks except ours and truck tread. Grant didn't say much. He just stood there with his jaw clenched while I pretended I was inspecting storm damage. Then one of the maintenance guys opened the stove to make sure nothing had nested there before they boarded the place up. There was no ash inside, no debris, just Grant's notebook folded twice and tucked deep in the firebox. He opened it with gloves on. Most pages were damp, but one entry near the middle was dry and smeared with dirt. It was written in Grant's hand from the look of it, though he swore he hadn't written it. It learned the rooms before we did. The cabin got demolished in spring. I made sure I wasn't on that crew. Sometimes in winter, if my apartment heat kicks on and I hear the ductwork pop under the floor, I still find myself lifting my feet. Story 3. The Bitterroot can feel wide open from certain overlooks, all those ridges stepping away from each other, blue and silver, but once you're down in the timber doing actual field work, it narrows around you. That summer I was on a search detail more than patrol, tracking lost hikers, overdue hunters, people who thought experienced outdoorsmen meant they owned a camouflage jacket and an opinion. My name doesn't matter much. What matters is that I'd been doing the job long enough to trust habits more than fear. If my pulse jumped, I checked my map. If the woods felt wrong, I checked the wind, that kind of thing. I was paired on that assignment with Priya Daster, who was a wildlife tech filling in on search support, and Wade Kincaid, a seasonal ranger whose whistle cord was always tangled around his radio mic. He chewed clove gum, carried a ridiculous number of batteries, and complained that Montana trail mix always had too many raisins. We were looking into a series of strange distress calls, not radio calls, whistle blasts. Hikers had reported hearing the standard 3-note emergency signal from off-trail sections where nobody was supposed to be. Every time a team went out, they found nothing. No campers, no tracks. Once they found a fresh orange marker ribbon tied around a sapling 3 miles from any active survey line. That's the kind of thing that irritates rangers before it scares them. You assume prank first. We set out mid-morning under clear weather. It was hot enough that the pine sap smelled sweet. My socks had already slipped down in one boot. Priya kept stopping to shake burrs out of her laces. Wade spilled electrolyte powder in his pack and spent 10 minutes looking sticky and annoyed. Mundane day. Good visibility. The first whistle came just after noon. 3 clean blasts from somewhere downslope. We stopped immediately. I answered with one long response, then listened. Nothing. Priya said maybe another team had jumped sectors without telling us. Wade said maybe some idiot bought a survival whistle and was messing around. Both were plausible. We moved toward the sound. An hour later, we found an old game trail dropping into a little basin, no marked trail used anymore. That's where things started stacking wrong. We found one orange survey ribbon tied at eye level. 50 yards later, another, then another, not leading anywhere useful, just spaced evenly as if something wanted us to keep a steady pace. I told myself kids could have done it, hunters too, anybody with access to a roll of flagging tape. Then Wade bent beside a patch of damp soil and said, "You guys seeing this?" There were prints, kind of. Barefoot impressions, narrow and human-looking, except each one ended in a pointed drag, like the toes hadn't lifted but been pulled through the mud after the foot left the ground. 3 separate sets crossed the basin side by side. Same stride length, same depth, same angle. Priya took photos. I stood there pretending to think while my stomach went unpleasantly hollow. We heard the whistle again, much closer this time from up ahead. 3 blasts. Then from behind us, the same 3 blasts answered back. Wade actually laughed, too loud. "Okay," he said, "not funny anymore." I wanted to call it in right then, but reception in that basin was garbage. We climbed toward a rock shelf to get signal. Halfway up, Priya grabbed my arm so suddenly I nearly swung on her. She pointed between the trees. At first I thought I was looking at a ranger in tan uniform standing still in the shade. Same sort of color, same upright shape. Then it leaned sideways without moving its feet, slow as a hinged sign in wind, until its shoulder touched the trunk beside it. Human bodies don't do that, not unless the person attached to them has stopped mattering. We backed up together and another figure showed itself farther right, and then a third. All 3 stood the same way, arms down, heads slightly tilted, not close enough to make out faces, close enough to know they were watching us. I said maybe there were people in gear, maybe my depth perception was off, maybe the light was doing something. As soon as I heard myself, I knew I was lying for comfort. Wade blew his whistle once, hard. All 3 lifted their right arms at the exact same speed. That was bad enough. Then the middle one stepped behind a tree trunk. A second later, it stepped out again. And again. 3 identical shapes emerged one after another from behind a trunk wide enough to hide only one body. I don't remember deciding to move. I just remember all 3 of us suddenly going uphill fast, not running exactly, not yet, because nobody wanted to trigger a panic in the others. Priya got the radio working long enough to spit out our location and possible persons off trail, which was a ridiculous phrase for what we were looking at, but the only one available to a brain still pretending. We reached the rock shelf and looked back. Nothing there. I almost started believing we'd missing it until the whistle blew again right beside the shelf, so close it stabbed my ear. Wade yelped and turned. One of them was below us, maybe 15 feet away, peering up from the edge of the rock. Its face was mostly hidden by shadow and branches except for the mouth, which was too small for the head, pursed like it was practicing how lips work. Around its neck hung a ranger whistle on green cord. Wade's ranger whistle. His chest went visibly flat. He looked down. The cord was gone from his own neck. That snapped us cleanly into motion. Priya hauled him by the pack strap and I took point downslope toward a suspension bridge over the creek because it was the fastest clear route. We crashed through brush, lost the basin trail entirely, found it again by luck or instinct, I don't know. At the bridge, Wade stopped dead. 3 figures stood on the far side in a row, not blocking it exactly. Waiting. Another whistle sounded behind us. Priya hissed off the side and vaulted the low bank instead of taking the bridge. I followed because there was no time to argue. Wade came after us, sliding and swearing. We crashed into the creek up to our thighs, icy enough to bite the breath out of me, and pushed downstream under the bridge cables while those things, I'll just call them things, remained above. I looked up once. One was leaning over the railing with Wade's whistle between its lips, but its cheeks never puffed when the sound came. We stayed in the water longer than we should have, long enough my legs went numb. But the whistles faded. Eventually we cut east, climbed to an old horse trail, and got picked up near dusk by another team. The physical proof came later, back at base, when Priya downloaded audio from a field recorder. Most of it was brush noise, our talking, boots, wind. Then there was a clip timestamped 3 minutes before Wade ever blew his whistle the first time. On it, clear as day, were 3 emergency blasts from maybe 10 feet away. And under them, very faint, my own voice saying, "Do not answer that." I don't remember saying it. Priya doesn't remember hearing it. Wade transferred out before the next season. I stayed because I was stubborn more than brave. But I stopped carrying a whistle on my chest after that. I keep it zipped deep in a pocket where nothing can borrow it. Story 4. Flathead mornings can be so clean they make you feel forgiven. That's the stupid part. A place can give you that kind of light and still hold something mean in it. I was stationed at a small lakeside unit for one spring shoulder season, doing solo rounds before visitor traffic picked up. Mostly I checked locked gates, posted fire notices, and made sure winter hadn't pulled any roofs loose. There was an old day-use shelter near the north end with a hand pump, 2 picnic tables, and a rain barrel somebody had left by the back wall years ago. Tourists loved that spot in summer because of the view over the water. In April, it was just gulls, damp cedar, and a lot of silence. I'd been on site maybe a week. I still had unopened boxes in my assigned cabin. My electric kettle clicked off too soon, so tea came out lukewarm unless I boiled it twice. I had a crossword folded in my jacket pocket, a grocery list with eggs, band-aids, lamp bulb written on the back, and one of those cheap pens from the visitor center that leaked blue into my fingers. My life was very small and ordinary. The first weird thing happened in the rain barrel. It had rained overnight, and I went around in the morning to check for storm debris. When I passed behind the shelter, I glanced into the barrel and saw my reflection on the water, only it wasn't just mine. There was a man standing directly behind me in the reflection. Tall, coat dark with water, face blurred by ripples. I spun around so hard my radio smacked the pump handle. Nobody there. I stood still, listened, checked the tree line, even called out. Nothing but the soft plink of water from the shelter roof. I told myself a branch shadow had lined up weird, easy, optical nonsense. The human brain loves faces. I went on with my rounds, annoyed more than frightened. Around noon, I came back by the shelter and found both picnic tables wet except for 2 dry handprints on one bench, spaced as if someone had been leaning there watching the lake. The rain had stopped hours earlier. That bothered me, still not enough to panic. I thought maybe someone had ducked in while I was on the south loop. That night in the cabin, I caught movement in the bathroom mirror while brushing my teeth. Just a suggestion of someone stepping past the doorway behind me. I wheeled around with foam still in my mouth. Empty hall. I laughed at myself then. A real laugh. I was overtired, alone too much, keyed up from seasonal relocation. All the reasonable explanations lined up beautifully. Then I looked back at the mirror. There were muddy fingerprints on the glass at eye level. not smeared on from the outside, impressed from the inside surface over the steam. I did not sleep much after that. The next day I radioed in some excuse about possible trespassers and spent the afternoon checking locks. The shelter felt worse. Not active exactly, attentive. The rain barrel had tipped slightly overnight, though it weighed a ton when full. The water inside looked black instead of brown. I remember seeing a paper cup lodged at the rim and thinking, absurdly, I need to pick that up before it blows into the lake. When I leaned over the barrel, I saw myself again, and those hands, two pale hands, came up behind my reflected face and covered my eyes. I could still see the reflection. That's what broke me, not the hands themselves. The fact that they were over my eyes and I was still looking out from beneath them on the water. I staggered backward and clipped the barrel with my hip. Water sloshed over the rim. In the surface, the man was clearer now. Thin face, mouth closed, coat hanging too straight like wet fabric on a frame. The hands remained over where my eyes should have been in the reflection, even though in real life I was standing in the open, blinking, breathing hard, nobody touching me. I said out loud, "Nope," which is not the response of a dignified professional, but there it is. I started for the truck keys I'd left on the shelter table. Halfway there I heard footsteps behind me on soaked gravel. Measured, close, matching mine between steps. I didn't turn. Some part of me understood turning was participation. I grabbed the keys, missed them once because my fingers had gone clumsy, then got them and backed toward the parking lot while looking only at the shelter windows and any reflective thing by accident. The side window of my truck gave me one more look. He was walking behind me with both hands lifted, fingers spread, preparing to place them over my face. I made it into the cab and slammed the door hard enough to shake the whole frame. The engine didn't fail me, thank God. I drove with the visor mirror snapped shut and my own rearview angled toward the ceiling because I couldn't stand the idea of seeing him seated in back. I spent that night at the main office 30 minutes away and told my supervisor there was somebody messing around the closed shelter. Technically true. The next morning, two of us went back in full daylight. No footprints, no sign of entry, no mud in the cabin, nothing on the shelter bench. I almost let myself fold the whole thing up and stick it in the drawer labeled stress. Then I found my sunglasses. They'd been on the truck dashboard the previous day. I remember because I'd wiped lake spray off them with my shirt. Now they were on the shelter table, folded neatly. On the inside of both lenses, where they'd rested against the bridge of my nose, were 5 tiny muddy fingerprints, one set for each eye. I finished the season barely. I covered every mirror in the cabin with dish towels after sunset. I know how that sounds, I don't care. Some habits stay with you because they worked once and that's enough. Story 5. Eastern Montana doesn't get enough credit for how eerie it can be. Everybody expects the Western mountains to feel haunted because they're dramatic about it. The Badlands don't advertise. They just spread out and let the wind do the talking. I was assigned for one summer to a remote district where my patrol range included old ranch remnants, unofficial pull-ins, and one fenced meadow we kept closed for reasons buried in some file cabinet long before I got there. The closure order was simple. No camping, no foot traffic beyond the outer marker posts, no exceptions without authorization. I asked why once and got a shrug from a supervisor who probably didn't know either. Soft ground, he said. Maybe cultural sensitivity. Could have been either, could have been neither. My name's Tomas Ibarra. At the time I was the kind of ranger who hated closed signs on principle. If I couldn't explain a rule to a visitor, it bothered me. So the place already had my attention before anything happened. The meadow sat low between ridges where the wind died strangely. Even on rough days, that dip held still air. The approach road was washboarded to hell. I had a bag of stale pretzels in the console, bug spray that leaked every time I uncapped it, a pair of work gloves stiff with dried mud, and an old straw hat I wore because the brim on my issued one flopped into my eyes. I remember these things because that afternoon felt ordinary right up until it didn't. I was there to replace a section of fencing trampled by bison. Simple chore. In and out. Before I reached the fence line, I noticed the cottonwoods around the meadow had strips of bark peeled away at chest height, all facing inward, dozens of them, pale curls hanging toward the grass. Not random damage, too even. It looked like the trees had been licked clean in long vertical strokes. I told myself deer rub, maybe porcupine, maybe weather had lifted it that way over time. None of those explanations satisfied me, but they were available, so I used them. Inside the fence, the grass lay flat in a broad spiral pattern around a bare patch near the center. No tracks in it, just pressed down as if something had turned there over and over without weight. My mouth went dry at that. I don't know why that detail got me before anything else did, but it did. There was also a smell, faint, not rot, more like wet stone after rain, except it hadn't rained in days. I worked anyway, replaced 2 posts, restrung one section, kept glancing toward the center without meaning to. Once I heard a soft chiming sound from out there, and I figured some old wire or tag was blowing against itself even though nothing else was moving. When I finished, I did what I shouldn't have done. I stepped through the fence to look closer. I know, stupid. The ground felt normal at first, dry and springy under my boots. There were little useless things that stand out in memory now. A grasshopper with one wing torn, the cap from a medicine bottle half buried in dirt, a feather snagged on a sage branch, my own breath sounding too loud because the hollow held it. At the edge of the bare patch, I found 3 antler tips wired together with old twine and hung low from a stick I swear had not been there when I first looked across the meadow. They knocked softly together when I bent near them. That must have been the chiming. I should have left then. Instead, I crouched, and that's when I saw the marks in the dirt around the antler bundle. Not hoof prints, not boot prints. Impressions like knees had pressed in a circle around it. Many knees, deep enough to hold shadow. The temperature dropped so fast my forearms prickled under my sleeves. Behind me, something moved through the grass without sound. I turned and saw the strips of bark on every tree around the meadow lifting outward all at once, as if 100 pale tongues had tasted the air. Then the thing in the center stood up. I hadn't seen it because I'd taken the bare patch for ground. It rose from that patch in folds of grass, roots, and something pale threaded through it like tendons. Human height maybe a little taller, but wrong in the way a scarecrow is wrong when it seems to possess its own balance. Antler tips and little bits of bone clicked softly from its sides as it straightened. There was a face shape only because there was a hollow where a face would be. Deep in that hollow, something moved like breath behind reeds. I did not try to understand it. I started to, and then realized I didn't want to. It took one step toward me, and the grass under its foot blackened in a ring. That is the image that still comes back when I'm trying to sleep. I ran for the fence, but not blindly. Some practical part of me knew I had tools on the outside and open ground beyond that. I hit the wire with my thigh, went over badly, tore my pants at the knee, and left skin on a post staple. Behind me came that soft chiming again, faster now, as if the little antler pieces were knocking in excitement. I made it to the truck, and found my keys weren't in my pocket. For half a second, I just stood there in the heat with my brain blank as a kicked radio. Then I saw them hanging from the fence wire where I'd crawled through earlier, looped neatly over the top strand. I don't know whether I dropped them there or whether. Number doesn't matter. I went back for them because I had no choice. The meadow had gone still again. The thing was no longer in the center. I could feel that more than see it, the way you can feel someone in a room before they speak. I snatched the keys, backed toward the truck, and saw the grass inside the fence parting in a slow line parallel to me, keeping pace. I got the engine on the first turn and didn't look back until I hit the ridge. Nothing visible, just the meadow, quiet as a held breath. The proof came after. When I got back to housing and changed out of my ripped field pants, I found my ranger patch missing from the sleeve. Thought I'd lost it on the fence. 2 days later, I returned with another employee to finish the repair from outside the closure line only. My patch was nailed to one of the peeled cottonwoods at chest height, not pinned. Nailed through the embroidered badge with an old square-cut fencing nail I hadn't used. I left it there. Let them issue me a new one. That meadow is still on maps. It still looks empty from above. That means less than people think. Story 6. Glacier gets most of the mythology, but some of the loneliest ranger work I ever did was at a little research outpost south of there, up near the edge of a burn scar where lodgepole came back in dense and mean. It wasn't much of a station, 2 prefab buildings, 1 generator shed, weather instruments, and a service track that turned to ruts every time it rained. In winter closure periods, a skeleton crew rotated through to keep the place from freezing solid. That February it was me, Hassan Vale, and Ingrid Sorensen. Hassan was all systems and lists, the kind of person who labeled extension cords. Ingrid talked to the ravens like they were coworkers. I mostly did rounds, stove checks, and pretended the constant groaning of cooling metal didn't bother me after dark. We'd been snowed in for 2 days, nothing dramatic, just enough accumulation that the road was useless until plow access. The station smelled like diesel, wool socks, canned soup, and that sour note wet gloves leave by a heater. My chapstick had snapped in half in my pocket. Hassan kept playing the same 7 songs through a tinny speaker. Ingrid had left a mug with instant oatmeal welded to the bottom on the windowsill, normal trapped with coworkers' stuff. The first crack in that normal came near dusk when Ingrid went out to the generator shed. She had on a red knit cap under her hood. I remember because she complained it made her hair static. Why? She was gone maybe 3 minutes when the radio on the wall crackled with her voice. "Kara, can you bring the wrench set?" I answered that I was coming. At the same moment, the outer door opened behind me and Ingrid walked in, stamping snow off her boots. Red cap, hood up, same coat. I just stared. She frowned and said, "What?" Then the radio crackled again in Ingrid's voice. "Kara, hurry up." Hassan heard it too. He slowly set down the soup and he was opening. There are rational explanations for almost everything at first touch. Feedback, a previous transmission finally pushing through, somebody else on frequency. I grabbed those explanations like handholds. Ingrid even laughed once uneasy and said maybe she'd radioed before coming in and the delay was weird. Then we noticed something simple. The Ingrid standing inside wasn't breathing steam. The door had just opened into sub-zero air. Hassan and I were both steaming at the mouth from standing near the draft. She was. That's the detail that made my scalp tighten. She must have seen us noticing because her expression changed in a very small way, not monstrous, just inaccurate, like someone rearranging their face based on memory rather than muscle. Hassan said, too carefully, "Ingrid, what did you go out for?" "Wrench set," she said. Ingrid, the real Ingrid, hated using the generic set because she always carried one specific ratchet in her pocket. She decomplained about the missing 10mm all week. I took one step back. The floor creaked. The thing in Ingrid's coat copied the step a second late, not moving farther, just mimicking the sound with its boot. Then the radio screamed with static and real Ingrid came through, voice ragged and panicked now. "Don't let it in." The one inside smiled. Every tooth had the same size and shape. Flat little white blocks, no canines, no variation, like they'd been cut from a strip and pressed into gums. That smile is what stayed. Hassan moved first, which probably saved us. He slammed the inner security door between the common room and bunk corridor and shouted for me to get the flood switches. The thing in Ingrid's clothes cocked its head, watching us with polite curiosity, then tried the same smile again as if it had worked. I hit the exterior lights. The station flared bright through the windows, yard turning blue-white. For a second, the thing's outline showed wrong under the coat. Too many joints in the arms. Back humped where no back should be. Then it turned, not rushed, not angry, and walked out through the still-open door into the yard. I locked it behind it with shaking hands. Real Ingrid was pounding from the generator side, yelling to be let in. Hassan pulled her through the side entrance while I kept watch at the front windows. All three of us crowded the glass and saw it at the edge of the lights, standing just beyond the last clear circle. It looked back at us wearing her red knit cap. Then it reached up and peeled the cap off. Not with its hand. With a second hand emerging from inside the sleeve near the elbow, I gagged. Ingrid made a sound I'd never heard from another adult, low and wounded and furious all at once. We barricaded until first light. No heroics, no chasing. The thing circled once or twice beyond the windows, sometimes tall, sometimes seeming shorter, as if posture was optional. Once it tapped on the glass using one fingernail with patient little clicks. I kept telling myself glass was enough, walls were enough, light was enough. I don't know if any of that was true. Morning just came before it decided otherwise. At dawn, the yard was empty. Tracks led away from the front step for 10 feet, then stopped in open snow. The proof waited by the generator shed. Ingrid found her red cap folded on the fuel drum, dry despite the night weather. Inside, it was a clump of coarse pale hair and one of her name tapes cut cleanly from her spare parka. I still can't explain how it got the tape. That spare parka was hanging in the locked mudroom the whole time. We checked. I left remote winter work after that. Hassan transferred to fire. Ingrid stayed another season, which I considered either brave or stubborn or both. Sometimes when someone smiles too carefully, when every tooth shows at once, I have to look away before my body remembers faster than my mind. Story 7. Horse patrol sounds romantic until you've done it in cold drizzle with a sore hip and a sandwich getting flattened in your pocket. The district I covered that year included old logging cuts on the western side of the state, with spur roads that vanished into alder and campsites people swore they'd just found. Like folding chairs and beer cans bloom naturally under pine. My patrol partner most weeks was Lucille Penn, who could sit a horse like she'd been born there and had a laugh loud enough to scatter grouse. We were checking a closed drainage where an old bunkhouse had partly collapsed over winter. The public wasn't supposed to ride in there until hazard trees came down. That alone brought people in, of course. But a sign somewhere in half the county wants to know what's behind it. The morning started wet and annoying. My slicker snapped at the collar in the wind. Lucille had forgotten her gloves and wore a mismatched wool pair from the tack room. My horse, Bramble, kept trying to nose into my coat pocket for the smashed sandwich. Nothing special. About 2 miles in, we found evidence someone had camped near the bunkhouse recently. A tin cup by the fire ring still held rainwater, fresh enough. A strip of green fabric snagged on a nail, a bedroll impression under the lean-to. We both assumed trespasser first. Lucille muttered that she was sick of writing the same citation over and over. Then Bramble stopped, not balked, froze. Every muscle under me tightened. Lucille's mare did the same a second later, ears pinned so hard they looked painted back. I smelled fresh mud and something musky underneath it, like wet hide left too long in a truck bed. There was a green jacket hanging from a branch up ahead, Ranger green. That punched a little hollow into my stomach because no one in our district was missing gear. I told myself some hunter had stolen an old uniform shirt from a thrift store. People do weird things. Lucille dismounted first. That was her way. She handed me her reins and went closer while I kept scanning the trees. The jacket was hooked neatly by the collar, sleeves hanging limp. One shoulder had our patch on it, older style, years out of use. The back was damp with mud from the inside. Lucille said very quietly, "Owen." I looked where she was looking. At first I didn't see it because it was pressed flat along the far side of a trunk, body aligned vertically with the bark. Then it moved its head around the tree without moving the rest of itself. A face appeared upside down first, hair hanging in strings, skin bark pale where it showed through mud. Then one hand slid into view above it, fingers spread wide and too long gripping the trunk. It came down the tree head first, not fast, deliberate, knees bent backward against the bark, boots if they were boots, scraping wood in short controlled taps, and it was wearing the jacket, or the jacket was wearing it. That's almost closer. The sleeves were too short for the arms inside. The collar yawned away from a neck that seemed to flex in separate pieces when it swallowed. Lucille backed up slowly. "Bear it," she whispered, which made no sense at all, but I knew what she meant. Sometimes your mouth reaches for the nearest category even while your eyes are refusing it. The thing stopped halfway down and turned its head farther than I thought a neck could turn. Its eyes were hidden under hair, but the mouth showed. There were no lips, just teeth resting uncovered in a wet line. Bramble went sideways so violently I almost lost the reins. That snapped the moment. Lucille lunged for her mare, got one foot in the stirrup, and shouted for me to move. The thing dropped the rest of the way without bending its legs, just let gravity take it and landed in a crouch too deep for a human body. Then it began crossing toward us in these quick, sideways lopes, one shoulder always leading, jacket flapping open. I got on Bramble badly, nearly kicked off, then found my seat enough to turn him downhill. Lucille was already moving. We did not take the road. Horses know when to choose for themselves, and both of them wanted the creek crossing below the bunkhouse, so that's where we went. Behind us I heard the weirdest sound of the whole day, not a growl, not a yell, more like someone trying to laugh without understanding where laughter comes from. Branches whipped my face. Bramble hit the bank too hard, slid, caught himself. Lucille's mare took the creek in one jump. I looked back once from the water. The thing had reached the bank but would not step in. It paced along the edge, jacket hanging dark and heavy, head jerking in short bird-like motions as it watched us cross. Then it gripped a sapling with one hand and bent it nearly double without seeming to notice. We rode out 6 miles before either horse settled enough for sense to return. Later, with a road crew and daylight, we went back for the abandoned camp and to retrieve the old jacket if we could. The branch was bare, no jacket, no clear tracks. The bunkhouse lintel looked older than it had the day before, as if nobody had slept there in months. The proof was on Lucille's tack. When we pulled the saddle blanket off her mare that evening, there was a handprint in dried mud pressed into the wool on the underside, where it had been against the horse's back all day. 6 fingers, long palm, impossible place for it. Lucille retired from horse patrol the next season. I didn't blame her. I still ride, but I don't hang jackets on pegs in my mudroom anymore. They go in a closed locker. I know how silly that sounds. I also know I don't ever want to walk in at dusk and see one hanging where I didn't leave it. Story 8. There are hollows in Montana that seem to swallow sound instead of echoing it. You can be standing under open sky and still feel roofed in. The last story happened in one of those places, a closed drainage in the Beartooth foothills, where an old patrol shelter had been taken off public maps after repeated washouts. Officially, I was just verifying boundary signs after spring runoff. Unofficially, I think the district wanted somebody stubborn enough to hike in and see why previous crews kept coming back with half the task unfinished and no clear explanation. By then I was training a younger ranger named Felix Arden. Good kid, careful, carried too many protein bars and not enough socks. He still believed if you packed correctly and checked your route twice, the outdoors would meet you halfway. I liked him for that. We started in good weather, bright morning, thaw smell in the dirt, creek running full but manageable. I had a headache from too much station coffee. Felix had a strip of athletic tape around one trekking pole because it had cracked lower down. We argued about whether gas station jerky counts as breakfast. Just two people walking into a workday. The trail to the old shelter wasn't on current visitor maps anymore, but traces remained. Blazes grown around by bark, a rotting footbridge, one signpost without a sign. Around noon, we noticed a few small things off kilter. A boundary marker facing the wrong direction. A fresh stack of 3 flat stones in the middle of the path where no one would naturally leave them. My compass shivering half a degree east, then settling again. None of that is supernatural by itself. Hikers mess with markers. Magnets exist. People stack stones because they're bored. Then we reached a junction that shouldn't have been there. I know that sounds dramatic, but I mean exactly that. According to the old topo and my own prior notes, the path forked once before the shelter. What stood ahead of us was a 4-way split, each branch cut clean through the brush and marked by old wooden arrows. All 4 arrows pointed inward toward a blank circle carved into the post. Felix said maybe there used to be a trail network and the map was outdated. I almost agreed. Then I touched one arrow and the wood came away damp and smelling charred, as if it had just been burned though it was cold. We should have turned around then. Instead, we picked the left branch because it followed the creek on the map and I trusted water more than trail signs. 15 minutes later, we came back to the same junction from a different angle. That changed the air between us. Not fear yet, but the feeling you get when you miss a stair in the dark. We tried another branch, same result, same post, same blank circle. Felix started marking bark with his knife, good practice. On the 3rd loop we found the same tree again, but the mark was higher than he could have reached, not by inches, by 2 full feet. He said maybe it wasn't the same tree. I didn't answer because my throat had tightened. The first real sight of it came near the shelter clearing. I only know that because we found the shelter afterward, or what was left of it. At the time, all I saw was one of the spruces ahead of us bow inward strangely, as if a heavy tarp had been hung between it and the next tree. But there was no tarp, just a dark vertical seam in the air, maybe 6 feet tall, rippling faintly though the needles around it were still. Felix whispered, "Do you see that?" That helped weirdly. Shared fear is cleaner than private fear. I told myself heat shimmer, eye strain, a migraine aura, anything. Then something pressed outward from the seam. Not stepped through, pressed. The shape of a face, or what would have been a face if skin had been stretched from the wrong side against invisible material. Nose flattening, brow, chin, then a hand spread beside it, each finger feeling along empty air as though searching for an edge to unzip. I grabbed Felix's pack strap and pulled him backward so hard he swore. That's when voices started, not dead relatives, not anything so pointed, just us. Our own voices, somewhere in the trees behind the seam, continuing a conversation we had not yet had. "Take the right branch," I heard myself say. Then Felix's voice answered from nowhere I could locate. "It already knows the map." He looked at me with his whole face gone pale. He had heard it too. We ran, but the trail wouldn't hold shape. The shelter appeared suddenly off to our right, as if the land had moved it there. One-room structure canted sideways, roof punched in, door hanging. We ducked inside because it was solid, because walls are a habit people trust even when they shouldn't. Inside smelled like mold, mouse droppings, and cold ash. There was an enamel basin, one busted chair, a deck of cards fused into a lump, and scratch marks on the back wall tall as my shoulder. Fresh, old, I couldn't tell. The seam passed the doorway without entering, if that makes sense. The light outside bent around it wrong. Through the gap I saw those hand shapes pressing from the other side of nothing, traveling tree to tree as if the forest itself were thin there and something behind it was feeling for weak spots. Felix wanted to wait for evening and navigate by stars if we had to. Smart, I agreed, though sitting still in that shelter felt like letting something finish noticing us. The iconic image, the one that still wakes me up, came just before sunset. The shelter had a cracked window facing west. In that glass I saw the seam standing outside, and from its center a face pushed halfway through, featureless except for the mouth, which opened sideways instead of down, splitting broad across the smooth front of it like a cut in cloth. Then the mouth used my voice to say, perfectly calm, "You left your map." My map was in my hand. That was enough. We bolted uphill through the back instead of taking any trail. Straight scree, loose shale, deadfall, whatever slowed the thing more than us. Felix lost one pole. I lost my hat. We climbed until the trees broke and the sky opened. The moment we hit open slope, the pressure in the air changed. Not disappeared, backed off. We navigated out by ridgeline and stars, stumbling into the truck near midnight with our legs shaking and our mouths too dry to talk. The proof showed up the next morning. Felix unfolded the topo map I'd been carrying when the voice outside the shelter told me I'd left it. There, burned into the paper in a neat dark ring, was a new contour line circling a blank center where no feature existed on any surveyed version of that drainage. No ink, no scorch through to the back, just a brown line sealed into the fibers. Felix quit by fall. I don't hold that against him. I stayed longer than I should have because leaving felt too much like admitting the place had edited me. I still avoid blank circles on trail signs, even decorative ones. Especially decorative ones. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these stories, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let me know in the comments which story unsettled you most, and share this with your friends who love a good scare. Until next time, stay safe out there.